Rain pelted my face as security gripped my elbows, marching me across the saturated asphalt like a criminal. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the third-floor executive suite, I could see them all raising crystal champagne flutes, laughing around the new corporate appointee. Brianna Vance, with her manicured posture, flawless smile, and shiny Harvard credentials, stood at the center of attention while colorful helium balloons bobbed against the ceiling tiles. Under my left arm, my wet cardboard box held the remnants of my 56 years of life. 3 framed family photos, a rusted coffee mug, and 5 worn notebooks containing 3 years of proprietary algorithms. I caught the eyes of Nolan Crawford, my vice president of municipal infrastructure for 3 agonizing years, as he lifted his glass in a theatrical toast. His lips formed words I could read even through the rain streaking down the glass paneling. "She will fix your mess," he mouthed, his mouth curving into a smug grin. 3 years. 1,095 days of chronic sleep deprivation, skipped dinners, and solving complex differential calculus equations for urban traffic flow, while executive leadership gradually eliminated my engineering support staff. 3 years of creating a revolutionary, self-balancing traffic optimization architecture intended to modernize municipal transportation forever. "We are pursuing alternative methodologies," Nolan Crawford had announced 30 minutes earlier, sliding a folded severance release across his polished mahogany desk without looking me in the eye. "We require someone with, shall we say, more conventional approaches and corporate alignment." I did not scream or slam my fists on his desk. I simply sat motionless as something vital inside my chest crumpled like thin aluminum foil. 56 years old, 3 years of my absolute intellectual peak, my sweat and my technical brilliance, dismissed in less than half an hour with sanitized corporate platitudes and passive voice phrasing. The security officer, Pete, who had greeted me warmly every morning for 36 months, avoided eye contact entirely as he watched me load my soaked box into the passenger seat of my 12-year-old hatchback. "Strict protocol from Human Resources." "Julian," he mumbled under his breath, almost apologetically, staring at his boots. I sat behind the steering wheel, turning the ignition key as the engine sputtered to life. I watched the golden light of the celebration continue through the rain-blurred windows. They had been secretly grooming Brianna Vance for 4 months. She was the rising corporate analyst, with impressive theoretical degrees, who questioned my practical engineering methods during every weekly department briefing. Wouldn't a standardized framework be significantly more sustainable across fiscal quarters? She would ask with rehearsed condescension, having never managed a real-world municipal grid failure under extreme thunderstorm conditions. Conventional approaches and traditional frameworks were merely executive code for an inability to comprehend complex adaptive engineering. The highway stretched before me as my worn windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. I had poured everything into that municipal traffic system: my intuition, my mathematical insight, my personal time, and my health. Now a corporate climber with 0 operational experience was stepping in to claim credit for my life work. Before I continue this story, I need to check something with you. If you are finding this tale of corporate betrayal and technical vindication engaging so far, please show your support by hitting that like button right now. Leave a comment sharing if you have ever been unfairly dismissed by incompetent management, and make sure to subscribe to follow this entire journey. Trust me, the corporate executives never saw what was coming next. My name is Julian Pierce. Until 40 minutes prior, I was the lead systems architect for one of the most complex municipal traffic management engines ever constructed in the state. This was an invisible, responsive digital ecosystem designed to ensure emergency response vehicles cleared congestion instantly, that morning rush hours flowed smoothly across 94 intersections, and that a metropolitan region of 2 million residents moved as a living organism rather than a gridlocked parking lot. At 56, with thinning gray hair and a preference for practical leather jackets over tailored business suits, I was easy for executive boardrooms to dismiss. But my engineering peers understood that my mind operated differently, perceiving fluid dynamics and pattern recognition where others saw only random vehicular congestion. 6 months prior, The trajectory had been entirely different. My system had undergone preliminary city-wide stress testing, yielding astonishing metrics. Municipal planners had marveled at verified simulations showing a 32% reduction in emergency ambulance transit times across the metropolitan area. This architecture will save hundreds of lives every single year, Mayor Evelyn Vance had remarked during an executive demonstration, her eyes reflecting genuine awe. How did you structure these predictive equations, Julian? I could not explain the full architecture in a brief slide deck. The system functioned because I had spent 3 years analyzing unscripted human behavior, adjusting for erratic weather changes, historical accident anomalies, and sudden crowd surges. I had hard-coded my operational intuition into the software, configuring thousands of real-time micro-adjustments that no standard corporate manual could document. Then Nolan Crawford hired Brianna Vance. Merely to alleviate your operational burdens, Julian, Crawford had assured me with that paper-thin executive smile. Brianna arrived with crisp power suits, high-end presentation decks, and endless corporate jargon. She quietly obtained administrative read access to my preliminary codebase. She smiled with patronizing sympathy. Whenever I worked past midnight at my terminal, saying, "You really should delegate these complex tasks, Julian," while silently cataloging my architectural notes and system configurations. The first night following my termination, my personal phone remained completely silent. The second day passed in total isolation as well. Crawford and Brianna were undoubtedly celebrating their personnel transition, convinced that 3 years of proprietary engineering was now safely under their control. I sat on my back porch during that second evening, watching the distant city skyline light up against the clear night sky. 3 years of my career erased by corporate greed and a cheap bottle of sparkling wine. I had been naive to believe that irreplaceable technical expertise would shield me from corporate politics. Morning brought 27 missed calls on my phone display. I quietly prepared a fresh pot of coffee and watched the golden morning sunlight flood my living room. For the first time in 3 years, I had no corporate deadlines crushing my chest, no midnight emergency calls from executive directors, and no 70-hour workweeks to endure. Only absolute silence stretched before me. At 9 in the morning, my phone vibrated once more. The caller display did not show Brianna Vance or Nolan Crawford. It was Audrey Vance, the sole junior engineering technician who had survived Crawford's cost-cutting measures 6 months ago. I hesitated for a moment before swiping the screen. "Julian?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with visible panic. "It is completely falling apart down here." The entire northern transit quadrant went into total gridlock yesterday at 4 in the afternoon. Ambulances were trapped on Main Street for 45 minutes. Municipal dispatch had to order emergency helicopter evacuations for 3 critical medical calls. I remained quiet, listening to her breathing over the line. "Brianna has been trying to force standardized traffic algorithms into your control nodes since yesterday morning, but her adjustments are compounding the failure. Nolan Crawford is losing his mind in his corner office. The mayor's chief of staff has called our department 4 times today. That sounds like a severe operational challenge for their new leadership," I responded, keeping my tone measured and calm. "Operational challenge?" Audrey gasped. "Julian, it is an absolute disaster. The city council just convened an emergency hearing. The mayor is threatening to terminate our multi-million-dollar municipal contract for material breach by end of day today." "Audrey, I was officially terminated," I reminded her gently. "Nolan Crawford had security escort me across the parking lot while he toasted my replacement with champagne. They explicitly stated they no longer required my services. They are simply experiencing the direct consequences of their own executive decisions." "Julian, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Real people are suffering out there on the roads." That statement hit me like a physical blow. Ordinary citizens, emergency responders, working parents trying to pick up their children, people who had nothing to do with Nolan Crawford's corporate vanity. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking a deep breath. "I must go now, Audrey." "Wait, Julian." I ended the call, set the phone onto the wooden table, and walked over to my living room window. The distant highway was visible from my home, transformed into a motionless ribbon of stagnant vehicles and flashing red brake lights. People were suffering because an arrogant executive believed engineering intuition could be replaced by a corporate resume. 1 hour later, my doorbell rang loudly. I already knew who was standing on my porch before I unlocked the door. Nolan Crawford stood on my welcome mat, his executive appearance completely shattered. His silver hair was disheveled, his expensive silk tie was hanging loosely around his unbuttoned collar, and dark purple circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes. "Julian," he began, attempting an ingratiating smile that failed to mask his desperation. "May I step inside for a moment so we can speak privately?" I remained firmly in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "Why would we speak, Nolan?" "We need to discuss a professional resolution to an ongoing technical issue," he said, smoothing his jacket nervously. "I no longer work for Apex Mobility Solutions," I said quietly. "Have you forgotten the security escort? The champagne toast for Brianna Vance?" He winced, swallowing hard. "That was an unfortunate misunderstanding regarding corporate timing." "Was it?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Or was it an intentional display designed to humiliate a senior architect after 3 years of dedicated service?" "Look, we are encountering minor technical friction with the system implementation. Brianna is exceptionally qualified, but she's encountering unscripted anomalies in your original code architecture." "My mess, you mean?" I asked calmly. "Is that not what you called my 3 years of work while raising your champagne glass?" His professional facade cracked entirely. "I never anticipated you could read lips through glass, Julian. A useful skill acquired during 3 years of executive meetings where you routinely interrupted my technical presentations," I replied. He straightened his back, attempting to adopt an authoritative posture. "The metropolitan area is paralyzed, Julian. Emergency services are compromised across 4 municipal districts. This situation transcends personal grievances and professional pride." I nodded slowly. "I agree completely. Which makes this a magnificent opportunity for Brianna Vance to demonstrate those conventional approaches you were so eager to purchase." "Julian, please," he blurted out, dropping his authoritative facade completely. "We are prepared to offer you an immediate independent consulting contract. We will triple your previous base salary. We will give you complete operational autonomy. Just step back into the control center and stabilize the traffic grid." I studied the executive standing before me. The man who had stripped my engineering team, dismissed my life work as a mess, and ordered security to march me out like a criminal before my terminal was even powered down. "No," I said softly. "Just no," he repeated, his jaw dropping in disbelief. "Just no. Precisely the way you terminated my employment." His face flushed a deep crimson as his temper flared. "This is absurd. Your personal pride is putting human lives at risk." "Lives were always at risk, Nolan," I countered, my voice hardening. "That is precisely why I worked 70-hour weeks. For 3 years building that fail-safe architecture while you slashed my department budget to inflate quarterly profit margins. That is why I missed my family milestones, skipped vacations, and sacrificed my health. You never cared about human lives when I was the one sacrificing everything to protect them. You cared about corporate bonuses." The following morning, a text message arrived from an unlisted number. An address, a scheduled time and 6 words, "Please, for the city. Mayor Vance." I recognized the location immediately, a small diner located 12 miles outside the downtown corporate district, neutral ground, a calculated and sensible choice. Mayor Evelyn Vance looked worn out when I walked into the corner booth. The immense stress of a paralyzed city was written across the lines on her forehead. She stood up immediately as I approached, extending her hand across the table. "Thank you for meeting with me, Julian," she said, her voice filled with genuine strain. "I have not agreed to resume any engineering operations," Mayor, I stated calmly, taking a seat opposite the city official. "I understand," she said, gesturing to the waitress for fresh coffee. "But you showed up, which tells me you still care about the citizens of this municipality. Just as deeply as you did when you spent 3 years designing this system. Your former corporate employer is currently preparing to scrap the entire digital infrastructure," she continued, leaning forward. "They are advocating a complete rollback to the 15-year-old legacy system. I felt a sharp pang of indignation at the thought of my revolutionary work being discarded by panicked executives. That would be an enormous step backward, I said. It would be a catastrophe, Mayor Vance corrected firmly. Emergency response times have spiked by 41%. We have recorded 2 severe traffic collisions where emergency medical assistance was delayed by gridlock. School districts cannot maintain bus schedules. Commerce is grinding to a halt across the entire county. The waitress placed 2 mugs of coffee on our table. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, gathering my thoughts. I understand you were treated disgracefully by Apex Mobility, Mayor Vance said softly but directly. I personally observed your dedication during the initial municipal trial phases. I witnessed the brilliance of your architecture, and I was appalled when I learned you had been removed from the project. Did Nolan Crawford inform you that I was terminated, or did he claim I voluntarily resigned? I asked. She met my gaze directly. His official statement to the city council claimed you chose to pursue outside opportunities. I recognized it immediately as sanitized corporate misdirection. They fired me without prior notice, I explained. They replaced me with an analyst who questioned core engineering principles she failed to understand, and they threw a champagne celebration while security escorted me out of the building. Mayor Vance winced visibly. I am deeply sorry, Julian, truly. But right now, 2 million residents are bearing the cost because the system you built, the system that operated flawlessly under your guidance, is failing without your oversight. It is failing because corporate leadership believed anyone with an advanced degree could manage a complex adaptive framework without understanding its foundational principles, I stated. Because they prioritize corporate credentials over proven operational results. I know, she interrupted, holding up a hand, and they were catastrophically wrong. But allowing them to ruin this city only punishes innocent citizens. I stared into my coffee cup, evaluating the strategic options. Mayor Vance reached across the table, her tone resolute. Help us resolve this crisis, Julian. Not for Apex Mobility Solutions, but for the municipality. I possess executive authority to retain you directly as Special Chief Municipal Architect, completely bypassing Apex Mobility Solutions. Apex Mobility holds the proprietary municipal license I noted. And currently, Apex Mobility is in material breach of contract for failing to deliver functional infrastructure under Section 4 of our municipal procurement agreement, Mayor Vance countered sharply. We possess clear legal grounds to terminate their exclusive license immediately under federal contract law and federal trade secret provisions. A spark of technical determination ignited inside me. I would require absolute guarantees, Mayor, complete creative authority over the system, my name on every municipal filing, patent submission, and technical white paper. And I select my own engineering team without corporate interference. Mayor Vance's eyes brightened. You have already mapped out this strategy. I map out every contingency, Mayor. It is how I engineered the traffic system, she nodded firmly. Consider it done. As I walked back to my vehicle, my phone vibrated with a message from Audrey Vance. Emergency executive board meeting called for 10 tomorrow morning. Nolan Crawford is planning to tell the board that your software contained deliberate bugs. Brianna is claiming sabotage. Please help us. I smiled to myself as I read the message. Sabotage, naturally, because executive vanity could never admit that Brianna Vance, despite her Ivy League diplomas and corporate posture, simply lacked the engineering capability to operate what I had built. It had to be framed as malice rather than her own technical limitations. That night, as I reviewed my mathematical diagrams, I received a direct call from Brianna Vance. I answered on the 6th ring. Julian, her voice was strained, stripped of all its former corporate poise. We need to speak immediately. We are speaking right now, Brianna, I answered calmly. I know what you did, she asserted, attempting to project authority. The missing calibration files, the undocumented variable overrides, the erratic node responses. You intentionally structured this system to fail without your input. I let out a quiet laugh. Is that truly your internal narrative, Brianna? That I somehow foresaw my sudden termination months in advance and deliberately corrupted my own life work? Then explain why the system refuses to respond to standard mathematical inputs, she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. Perhaps it responds precisely as designed, I said quietly. Perhaps you simply lack the technical depth to comprehend how an adaptive system operates under real-world stress. The Central Public Library was virtually quiet when I stepped onto the third floor at 8 in the morning. Brianna Vance was already seated inside the small glass study room, her hair pulled back tightly into a rigid bun, dark circles lingering beneath her eyes. For a brief second, I almost felt a flicker of sympathy for her situation. Almost, "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Julian," she said, standing up as I opened the door. I placed my physical notebook onto the wooden table between us. "Let us establish absolute clarity immediately, Brianna. I am not here to salvage your corporate career." "I understand," she said, lowering her gaze. "Do you?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "You stepped into my role without hesitation. You stood by, while Nolan Crawford toasted your arrival 30 minutes after security marched me out of the building like a criminal. You told executive leadership you would fix my mess." She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "I did not realize they were firing you that specific morning, Julian. But you were fully aware they were terminating my position," I noted. Her silence was a complete admission of guilt. "Now detail precisely what operational failures you are encountering across the grid," I instructed, opening my notebook. For the next 45 minutes, Brianna detailed the cascading control node failures across the metropolitan area. As she spoke, it became glaringly obvious that she had attempted to force rigid textbook algorithms onto an organic, self-adjusting network architecture. It was equivalent to attempting to control a living ecosystem with mechanical clockwork rules. "The system behavior is completely irrational," she exclaimed in frustration. "Control nodes that should execute identical timing patterns respond in completely divergent ways to identical traffic volumes." "Because those intersections are not identical, Brianna," I explained, turning my notebook toward the young analyst. "Each traffic corridor possesses its own distinct operational dynamics. Traffic corridors do not possess dynamics, Julian. They are static physical intersections. That is precisely why your management is failing," I said calmly. "You are managing this network as if it were constructed on static equations, when it actually responds dynamically to dozens of real-time variables that your standard models do not even measure." She stared at the hand-drawn equations in my notebook. "None of this exists within the official corporate documentation, because it cannot be documented using standard corporate templates," I responded. "Engineering an adaptive system is not about rigid rules. It is about understanding real-time relationships between variable factors that conventional analysts routinely ignore." She creased her brow, studying my notes. "Such as what?" "Such as the verified fact that the Northern Industrial Corridor flows differently during heavy rainfall because commercial truck drivers alter their braking distances," I explained. "Or that downtown pedestrian traffic requires dynamic timing adjustments based on local building canopy locations during storms. You cannot standardize human behavior with static textbook formulas. That is impossible to codify," she argued. "Not impossible. Merely impossible using your conventional approaches," I countered, closing my notebook firmly. "Which is why your implementation has collapsed." Brianna swallowed hard, her confidence entirely drained. "Will you assist us in stabilizing the grid?" "I have not determined my course of action yet," I replied. "What will it take, Julian? Name your consulting fee." I looked at her directly. "I do not care about your corporate money, Brianna. I demand total transparency." "What does that mean?" "It means before I touch a single line of code, the board of directors must receive a complete, unvarnished account of what occurred. How my architecture actually operates, why your conventional methods caused this crisis, and full executive accountability from Nolan Crawford." She turned pale. "You expect me to admit total operational failure to the board?" "I expect complete truth from everyone involved in this disaster," I said. Brianna stared at her notepad. "Nolan Crawford will never allow that narrative. He is currently informing the board that your software was fundamentally flawed from inception and that his decision to replace you was a necessary corrective measure." "Then I suppose the metropolitan grid will remain gridlocked," I said, standing up from my chair. "Julian, wait!" she called out, reaching across the table without touching my arm. What if I present the truth to the board independently? At tomorrow morning's emergency board meeting?" I paused, looking down at the young woman. Why would you take such a professional risk? Because you are correct, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Because I was wrong. I thought I could manage your system using standard corporate manuals, but I was completely mistaken. This is no longer about my corporate ladder. It is about public safety. I evaluated her sudden moral awakening with healthy skepticism, but I gave a single nod. The emergency meeting is at 10 tomorrow morning. I will be monitoring the proceedings very closely. As I exited the library, my personal phone rang. It was Mayor Evelyn Vance. Julian, I have officially secured emergency authorization from the City Council for your Chief Municipal Architect contract, she announced directly. Fully executed by the municipality, completely bypassing Apex Mobility Solutions. You may assume operational command immediately. There is one critical event occurring at 10 in the morning first. Mayor, I replied. An emergency board meeting at Apex Mobility. I intend to observe the outcome before launching our municipal transition. We do not possess time for corporate maneuvering, Julian. Gridlock is escalating by the hour. 24 hours will not compromise our structural plan, Mayor, but it will establish absolute legal authority for everything that follows. She paused on the line, then said softly, You have structured a complete strategy. I always engineer a complete strategy, Mayor. I watched the confidential meeting unfold through the clear glass paneling. Nolan Crawford projected elaborate financial graphs and system failure metrics, emphatically pointing to highlighted sections of my original codebase. He was clearly presenting his rehearsed narrative, framing my 3 years of adaptive architecture as an undocumented, defective experiment that necessitated my immediate termination. 15 minutes into his presentation, Nolan Crawford turned toward Brianna Vance, expecting her to deliver technical confirmation of his claims. Instead, Brianna stood up from her chair. I watched her lips move through the glass as she addressed the assembled board of directors. The expressions of the board members shifted rapidly from mild concern to profound shock. Nolan Crawford attempted to interrupt her, waving his hands in protest, but the board chairman slammed his palm onto the table, commanding Crawford to remain silent. Brianna continued speaking for 12 solid minutes, presenting my physical notebook diagrams and exposing how Crawford had forced the immediate termination of the system's sole architect to cut departmental costs and claim corporate bonuses. At precisely 10:37 in the morning, the heavy wooden door of the boardroom opened. An executive assistant approached my chair in the waiting lounge. Mr. Pierce, the board of directors requests your immediate presence inside the executive suite. I stood up calmly, straightened my suit jacket, and walked into the boardroom. An absolute silence fell over the room as I crossed the threshold. Every director stared at me with intense scrutiny. Thank you for joining us, Julian, the board chairman said, his voice measured and formal. Ms. Vance has just delivered an extraordinary report regarding your municipal traffic system architecture. I remained standing at the end of the mahogany table, saying nothing. She has informed this board that the ongoing municipal failures are not the result of flaws within your original software design. The chairman continued, but rather the direct consequence of attempting to apply conventional algorithms to an adaptive framework she admits she was unqualified to operate. He glanced sternly at Nolan Crawford, whose face had turned an unhealthy shade of purple. Furthermore, she states that your sudden termination was executed without technical auditing, knowledge transfer, or operational risk assessment. Precipitous and negligent, I added quietly. That is a remarkably accurate description of firing the lead systems architect of a multi-million-dollar public infrastructure project 30 minutes before throwing a champagne party. Now see here, Nolan Crawford shouted, slamming his hand onto the table. This is an internal corporate matter. Silence, Nolan, the chairman snapped sharply before turning back to me. Julian, the municipality has officially notified our corporate board of impending legal action for material breach of contract. Our firm is facing catastrophic financial liability and severe reputational ruin. We require immediate technical stabilization of the grid. I appreciate the urgency of your position, gentlemen, I replied calmly. However, I have already accepted a formal appointment as Special Chief Municipal Architect for the city, reporting directly to Mayor Evelyn Vance. Effective as of 9 this morning, a wave of astonished whispers broke out across the boardroom table. Nolan Crawford stood frozen, his eyes wide with horror. "You cannot do that," he stammered. "That is a direct conflict of interest. Apex Mobility owns the municipal system license." "Actually, your firm no longer holds an exclusive license," declared a commanding voice from the doorway. Mayor Evelyn Vance stepped into the boardroom, accompanied by the municipal city attorney and two senior legal advisors. As of 8:30 this morning, the municipality formally served Apex Mobility Solutions with a notice of immediate contract termination under Section 4 of our procurement agreement, citing material failure to maintain essential public safety infrastructure. The board chairman sank back into his chair, visibly shaken. This is completely unprecedented corporate intervention. What was unprecedented was terminating the sole engineer capable of operating a critical municipal safety system without a transition plan. Mayor Vance responded coldly. The city has exercised its statutory right under state municipal procurement laws to retain Julian Pierce directly. My new municipal division will have the traffic grid fully stabilized. Within 72 hours, I announced to the room, looking directly at Nolan Crawford, operating under my direct command with an independent engineering staff. "Your staff?" Crawford sneered, his voice cracking with desperation. "You do not possess an engineering team." "I do now," I replied smoothly. "Starting with Audrey Vance, whom I am hiring away from your company effective immediately, along with every junior technician who understands the value of adaptive engineering over corporate vanity." The vindication I experienced in that moment was not derived from watching Nolan Crawford crumble in front of his board of directors, nor from seeing the executive team realize their monumental error. The true vindication occurred 72 hours later inside the newly established Municipal Transit Control Center at City Hall. I sat at the central command console, flanked by Audrey Vance and my newly assembled engineering team. With a few precise keystrokes, I re-uploaded my core adaptive algorithms into the Metropolitan Grid nodes. Across the room, giant digital monitors illuminated with real-time data. Green signal corridors opened seamlessly across the Northern Transit District. The stagnant red congestion maps dissolved into smooth, continuous vehicular flow. Emergency response transit times dropped by 42% within the first 6 hours, reaching the lowest recorded metrics in the city's history. 2 days later, Mayor Evelyn Vance hosted a formal press briefing on the steps of City Hall, publicly announcing the creation of the Department of Adaptive Municipal Architecture under the leadership of Chief Architect Julian Pierce. Industry journals across the nation published feature articles detailing how an independent engineer had saved a major metropolitan region from catastrophic infrastructure collapse.